In today's session, we're gonna be discussing an overview of the digestive system and its different parts. We're gonna be also describing the structure and the functions of the digestive organs. And towards the end of this chapter, we're gonna be discussing some of the major homeostatic imbalances that affect the digestive system. So the digestive system is formed by two different groups of digestive organs. We have the gastrointestinal tract or the GI tract, and this includes the oral cavity, the mouth, the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. Associated to the gastrointestinal tract, we have accessory digestive organs. This includes the digestive glands like the salivary gland, the liver, the pancreas. We also have other accessory digestive organs other than the digestive glands. This includes the teeth, the lungs, the tongue, and the gallbladder. So if we're looking on here, we've got the first set of digestive organs, including the digestive tract or the gastrointestinal tract. We've got first the oral cavity, the mouth. Then we've got the pharynx, and if you remember, pharynx is divided into nasopharynx, the part of the pharynx located behind the nasal cavity. We've got the oropharynx, and the third part of the pharynx located behind the larynx. This is my laryngopharynx. So the parts that will be serving as a common pathway for both air and food, we've got the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx. The pharynx will be conducting the food down to a muscular tube. This is called the esophagus. And the esophagus will conduct the food into a muscular sac. This is the stomach. Stomach will then conduct the food into another muscular tube. This is my small intestine. And the small intestine is going to be divided into three different segments, as we're going to see today. We've got the most proximal part. This is called the duodenum. Next is going to be so you see on here, this C-shaped part is my duodenum. Next is going to be the jejunum. And finally, the terminal part is called the ileum. In the small intestine, we're going to be performing the absorption of the different nutrients, and the remaining part that will not be absorbed or will be failed to get digested will be conducted to the large intestine from the ileum. The large intestine starts with a pouch-like structure that will be receiving the undigested, unabsorbed part of the food. This is called the cecum, and will be conducting the undigested part of the food into the colon. Here we've got the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, and I have the S-shaped part on here. This is my sigmoid colon. Then I have the straight part of the large intestines. This is called the rectum. That will be conducting the feces to the anal canal to be released out through the opening of the anal canal. This is the anus. Accessory organs that will be associated with the digestive tract or the gastrointestinal tract. We've got the tongue, we've got the teeth, we've got the salivary glands. We've got three different sets of salivary glands. We've got first on here, this is my parotid gland, sublingual and submandibular glands. So we've got three sets of salivary glands. Again, parotid gland, sublingual, and submandibular glands. The largest gland of your body is going to be the liver. And associated with the liver, we've got another accessory digestive organ that will be storing the bile from the liver and will be releasing this bile when you get food down into your small intestine. This muscular sac that is located on the ventral surface of the liver, this is called my gallbladder. Another accessory digestive organ is going to be the pancreas that will be releasing important digestive enzymes that will help with the digestion of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. So again, what are the different organs that will be sharing in the formation of the digestive system? We've got the gastrointestinal tract first, starting with the mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine with three parts. The most proximal part, the C-shaped part of the small intestine, is the duodenum. Then we've got the jejunum, and finally we've got the ileum. The ileum is the one that will be conducting the remaining undigested and absorbed part of the food into this pouch-like structure of the large intestine, which is associated with the vermiform appendix. We call this pouch-like structure of the large intestine, it's the cecum. The cecum will allow the feces to travel up through the ascending colon, horizontally through the transverse colon, and then down through the descending colon, and then flips towards the midline, conducting the stools to the rectum through the sigmoid colon. A straight part on here of the large intestine, this is the rectum, that will conduct the stools towards the anal canal and then its opening, which is the anus. Again, associated glands that we have. First, we've got the salivary glands. This includes the parotid gland, sublingual, and submandibular glands. We've got the largest gland of the body here. This is going to be my liver. And we've got the pancreas. What are the different digestive processes that will be conducted by the digestive system? What are the six essential activities that will be conducted by the digestive system? First is the ingestion. So my ability to move the food from outside of the body to the inside of the body, it's only going to be a function of the digestive system. You can't eat through your vascular system. You can't eat through your skin, for example. So the only mean for you to be able to ingest, to take food from outside in, it's going to be through the digestive digestive system, and this is going to be the very first function of the digestive system. In order for me to be able to utilize the different nutrients in the food I'm eating, I need to break down this food on a mechanical level and on a chemical level. So if you get bread and you put the bread in the blender, did you change the chemical structure of this bread? What do you think? Did I change the chemical structure of the bread when I put the bread in a blender? So if I have complex carbs, they became simple carbs? No, they are still the same chemical structure, right? This is what we mean by a mechanical digestion. So you're gonna be breaking down the bread into smaller parts. This is a mechanical digestion. But if I'm breaking down this bread into simple sugar, like glucose, now I have transformed or break down the starch on a chemical level. We call this is a chemical digestion. So when you're chewing a piece of bread, you are performing a mechanical digestion, but in the same time, you're gonna be partially breaking it down on a chemical level. So if you get a piece of bread and you kept chewing the piece of bread, you will feel that there is some sugary taste that you will get. How did I get this sugary taste? By chewing the piece of bread, because in the salivary gland secretions, we're gonna be releasing an enzyme called the salivary amylase. And the salivary amylase is going to be breaking down the starch into simple sugar. So I get this sugary taste, although the bread doesn't have sugar in it. So where do you perform mechanical digestion? What do you think? Where do you perform mechanical digestion? In the mouth, you're performing mechanical digestion by chewing. And in the stomach is going to be churning the food, cutting it into smaller pieces. And in the small intestine also, you're going to be performing mechanical digestion by a process that we call segmentation, a type of muscle movement of the small intestine. We call this is segmentation. So try to imagine this is my small intestine on here. It's a tube. You've got this particle of the food, and this is another particle. What you're going to do, you're going to be relaxing the constricted parts, and you're going to be constricting the relaxed parts. So what's going to happen? You're going to be splitting this first food particle into two separate parts, and this second food particle into two separate parts, and you mix them together. And you keep doing it throughout the length of the small intestine, and this is going to allow you to break down the food on a mechanical level. So again, where is the mechanical digestion is taking place? It starts by chewing in the mouth. We're going to be performing churning of the food in the stomach, and by segmentation in your small intestine. Where do I perform a chemical digestion? Where do I change the chemical structure of the food? Where do you think? Where would you be starting the chemical digestion? Stomach? Anyone? So stomach under the effect of the acids, yes, we're gonna be performing chemical digestion under the effect of the acids released in the stomach, also under the effect of the different enzymes in the stomach. But I actually start the chemical digestion in the oral cavity, exactly, in the mouth. Remember, you're gonna be releasing saliva, and the salivary gland secretion is gonna contain enzymes, including the salivary amylase, as we mentioned just a minute ago. And this is gonna be breaking down the starch, the complex carbohydrates, into simple forms of carbs. So you actually start the chemical digestion in your mouth. All right? We're gonna be performing again further chemical digestion in the stomach, and we're gonna be completing the chemical digestion in the small intestine to prepare the food for the next step, which is the absorption. But remember, in order for me to allow all this to take place, I need to be moving the food along the gastrointestinal tract. I need to be able to perform a propulsion of the food. And propulsion starts within the oral cavity first by swallowing. Swallow the food. This is a type of propulsion. And then you're going to keep this food moving along your esophagus, in your stomach, your small intestine and large intestine by a type of propulsion that we call peristalsis. So you see on here how peristalsis is going to be performed. You perform a constriction behind the food bolus, the food particle, and a relaxation in front of the food bolus. So what's going to happen? The food is going to be moving from high pressure, where you're going to be performing the constriction, to the side with lower pressure, where you are relaxing. And then you constrict behind and you relax in front. So you keep the food moving along your gastrointestinal tract. What enhances this to take place is the stretch applied by the food itself on the wall of the small intestine. So the food is applying some degree of stretch to the wall of the small intestine. This enhances the wall of the small intestine to contract at the site where you've got food and to relax in front of it. So this allows the movement of the food along your gastrointestinal tract, again, by what mechanism of propulsion? By peristalsis. Congratulations, you have completed the digestion on a mechanical level. On a chemical level, what you're going to need to do next is to absorb those nutrients. And this is why you have been performing the digestion, to absorb the nutrients. So I need carbohydrates. I get the carbohydrates to move from the lumen of my small intestine to my blood. I've broken down proteins. I will be absorbing the amino acids. I've broken down the different lipids. I will be absorbing the fatty acids. I will be absorbing the glycerol. So I need to perform absorption of the nutrients. This will be our next function of the digestive system. I've completed the absorption. I got all the nutrients I want. And what is still remaining are just wastes. So what you're gonna do with those wastes? What you're gonna do with those wastes? You're gonna get rid of them. You're gonna get rid of them by defecation. All right. So again, what we are discussing on here, those are the 6 essential activities performed by the digestive system. Those are what are marked by the numbers. So again, I start by ingestion, propulsion. I will be performing mechanical digestion. I will break down the food into smaller pieces, and I will break down the food on a chemical level for me to reach the nutrients I'm able to absorb. What happens if I'm not able to absorb some kind of nutrients, or if I failed to digest some of the food I'm eating? You're gonna be getting rid of it by defecation. All right. Any questions? Any questions? All right. So moving on to the membranes of the gastrointestinal tract. So we're looking here at a serous membrane that is gonna be formed of two layers, like what we are used to. Around the heart, we've seen the pericardium. Around the lungs, we've seen the pleura. Here, we've got a different serous membrane that also has two layers. It's the peritoneum. It has a visceral layer that will be covering the external surface of most of the digestive organs. And the parietal layer is going to be lining the body wall from inside, the abdominal cavity from inside. The peritoneal cavity is going to be the space between the visceral and the parietal peritoneum. And it's going to be containing foods that lubricates the movement of the organs. So if we're looking here at the peritoneum, you will see two layers, a layer that would be covering the outside of the organ, and another layer that will be lining the abdominal cavity. Visceral layer is the one that will be covering the organ, and the parietal layer is the one that will be lining the abdominal cavity. But as I'm covering multiple abdominal organs at the same time, you will see that the two layers of the peritoneum are going to be forming connections between the organs and the body cavity. Those connections are what we call the mesenteries. So as you see on here, the stomach is, or the gastrointestinal tract is connected posteriorly to the posterior wall of the abdominal cavity by the dorsal mesentery. And anteriorly, we're gonna be connected to the liver, for example, at this level, and then to the anterior abdominal wall by the ventral mesentery. So we've got, again, two layers of the peritoneum, a visceral layer and a parietal layer. And as I have multiple abdominal organs located within the abdominal cavity covered by the peritoneum, we're going to be connecting them by the visceral and parietal layers of the peritoneum, and this is going to result in the formation of mesenteries. If you're connected to the posterior abdominal wall, we call this is the dorsal mesentery. If I'm connected to the anterior abdominal wall, it's going to be considered the ventral mesentery. And those mesenteries are actually what will keep the abdominal organs fixed in their place. Looking here at the cut section in the wall of the gastrointestinal tract, like a general structure here. The wall of the gastrointestinal tract is going to be formed of four main layers. From inside out, we've got the mucosa. Then we've got the submucosa. Then we have the muscle layers on here. We call this the musculosa or the muscularis externa. And then to the outside, we've got a very thin layer of connective tissue and epithelium covering the wall of the gastrointestinal tube. This is called the serosa. So again, what are the four main layers that we see on here? We've got mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa. So if we're looking closer to the structure of the mucosa, we're going to see that the mucosal lining of the gastrointestinal tube is going to be formed of a layer of epithelium. And if you remember, the type of epithelium that lines the gastrointestinal tract from the stomach to the anus, it's going to be a simple cuboidal, a simple columnar epithelium. Underneath any epithelium, we've got a layer of connective tissue to support this epithelium. We call this is my lamina propria. So the lamina propria is simply the layer of connective tissue that will be located underneath the epithelium of the mucosa. And we're going to have a very thin, delicate muscle layer located in the mucosa. We call this is the muscularis mucosa, or the muscle of the mucosa. Located to the outside of the mucosa, we're going to get the submucosa, and as you see, it's a layer of connective tissues. This is where my blood vessels and lymphatic vessels are going to be traveling in the wall of the gastrointestinal tube. To the outside of the submucosa, we've got the muscle layers, smooth muscles. They are mostly arranged into two layers in most of the abdomen of the gastrointestinal tract organs. We're gonna have two layers of smooth muscles. Those are the longitudinal muscle layer and the circular muscle layer. The general rule of the arrangement of those muscle layers is that the circular muscle layer is located to the inside, and the longitudinal muscle layer, as you see on here, is going to be on the outside. So you've got an internal circular muscle layer and an external longitudinal muscle layer. This is going to be in most of the organs of the gastrointestinal tract. We're going to see a few exceptions for this general rule. To the outside, the outermost layer of the wall of the gastrointestinal tube is going to be the serosa, and as you see on here, it has one row of squamous cells to the outside, and underneath it, it has a very thin layer of connective tissue for it to support this epithelium. So again, what we're looking at in here, we're looking at the four layers forming the wall of the gastrointestinal tube. Those are the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and to the outside of it, it's the serosa. Moving on to the very first organ of the gastrointestinal tract, it's going to be the oral or the buccal cavity. It's going to be bounded anteriorly by the lips, laterally by the cheeks, superiorly by the palate, and inferiorly by the tongue. The opening of the mouth is what we call the oral orifice. Oral orifice is the opening of the oral cavity to the outside. And the oral cavity, along with the pharynx and esophagus, will have a special type of epithelial lining. It's going to be the non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. The non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium is the type of epithelial lining of the oral cavity, pharynx, and esophagus. The rest of the gastrointestinal tract is going to be lined with non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium, one row of columnar cells. And if you remember, we needed the stratified squamous epithelium to provide protection to those exposed surfaces to the outside. Looking here at the structures related to the oral cavity, we can see anterior 2/3 of the palate. It's the hard palate formed by the palatine process of the maxillary bone and the palatine bone. Posterior to it, we have got the soft palate and the continuation here pending down in the midline. It's the uvula. As you see, this is going to be the tongue, and related to the tongue posteriorly, this is going to be the lingual tonsil. On both sides of the oropharynx, we're going to get the palatine tonsils. And if we kept moving down through the oropharynx, we'll reach the laryngopharynx, which is located just posterior to the larynx. And as you remember from our discussion of the respiratory system, we've got multiple cartilages that build up the larynx. This includes the epiglottis, the thyroid, the cricoid cartilages that will be forming the structure of the voice box on here or the larynx. And if you remember, air will travel from the larynx down to another tube. This is going to be my trachea. Located posterior to the trachea as a continuation of the oropharynx is going to be the esophagus. Questions? Questions? Another important diagram. So this is a 5 stars diagram for the upcoming lab exam. Also another 5 stars diagram for the upcoming lab exam. It's going to be the interior view of the oral cavity. Shown here, this is the palatine raphe. The continuation here of the soft palate pending down in the midline. This is the uvula. We've got two arches that you can see on here, the palatoglossal arch and the palatopharyngeal arch. And located in between those are my palatine tonsils. You can see the attachments here of the lips to the mucosal covering of the maxilla and the mandible. Those are my labial frenulae. So you've got a superior labial frenulum, inferior labial frenulum on here. We've got the attachment of the tongue to the floor of the oral cavity. This is going to be the lingual frenulum. And on both sides of the lingual frenulum, we've got the openings of the submandibular glands, and lateral to them, we've got the smaller openings of the sublingual gland duct. All right, so the first question for today's in-class activity is going to be chemical digestion is initiated in which part of the gastrointestinal tract in here? Mouth, stomach, small intestine, or large intestine? Which one do you think? Yes, A, the oral cavity. Remember, in the oral cavity, we're going to be releasing a bunch of enzymes. This includes the salivary amylase and lingual lipase. So I start the chemical digestion in the oral cavity. Yes, exactly. Tongue, its function is repositioning and mixing the food while you're chewing. Formation of the food bolus, which is the mixture of the food and the saliva. Also, it is going to be responsible for the initiation of swallowing, and it plays an important role in speech, taste as well. Lingual frenulum is what we've seen here. It's going to be the attachment of the tongue to the floor of the mouth. We've got surface papillae on the dorsum of the tongue. This includes the filiform papillae, which are widely distributed all over the tongue on here. All those are my filiform papillae, which are whitish and will give roughness to the dorsum of the tongue. We've got those reddish papillae. Those are called the fungiform papillae. And in the posterior 1/3 on here, they are forming a V-shaped line in the posterior part of this dorsal surface of the tongue. Those are my circumvallate papillae. And in the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, we've got here on the lateral sides another type of papillae. Those are called my foliate papillae. All the three on here, the fungiform, the circumvallate, and the foliate are actually housing taste buds. All the three on here are housing taste buds for you to be able to taste the different chemicals. The only one that doesn't participate in taste sensation is going to be the filiform papillae, and their main function is to provide friction to allow you to mix the food while you are chewing. Salivary glands are going to be responsible for the release of the saliva that will be cleansing the oral cavity. It's also going to be moistening and dissolves the food chemicals. It aids in the formation of the bolus. And remember, the bolus is the mixture of the food with the saliva. It's going to be containing enzymes that will help in the breakdown of the starch. The composition here of the saliva includes water, acids, electrolytes, salivary amylase, lingual lipase, mucin, IgA, lysozymes, and defensins. The salivary amylase and the lingual lipase, those are two digestive enzymes that will help break down. Here the amylase is helping breaking down the carbohydrates, and the lingual lipase is going to be helping breaking down lipids. Three different sets of salivary glands, as we see on here. The first one located at the angle of the mandible. This is the parotid gland. And you see its duct on here. So this is the parotid gland, and this is the duct of the parotid gland. Another set of salivary glands is going to be the one located below your tongue. We call this is my sublingual gland. And the one that is located below the floor of the mouth, we call this is my submandibular gland. So three different sets of salivary glands on here. Those are the parotid gland, sublingual, and submandibular glands. And this is going to be a 4 stars diagram. Moving on to the teeth, the primary or and permanent dentations are formed by age 21. We start first by having 20 deciduous teeth that will erupt between 6 to 24 months of age. The roots of those deciduous teeth are going to be resorbed, and the teeth will be falling between 6 to 12 years of age and will be replaced by the permanent teeth. We've got 32 permanent teeth on here. All except the third molars will erupt by the end of adolescence. So you see on here, this X-ray, those are the deciduous teeth on here. And they are going to be replaced by those permanent teeth going up. All right, so around what age is this person? Around what, how old is this person? Since I'm taking the X-ray off, around what age? At what time do you have the resorption of the roots of the deciduous teeth and the replacement by permanent teeth? 6 to 12, 6 to 12. So this is a 7 years old child here. This X-ray is for a child of 7 years of age. Pharynx, we have two parts of the pharynx that we're concerned with in the digestive tract. The part of the pharynx located posterior to the oral cavity is the oropharynx, and the part of the pharynx located posterior to the larynx is going to be my laryngopharynx. The pharynx allows the food, fluid, and air to travel. Remember, this is part of the digestive tract that needs a high protection. That's why it's going to be lined with non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Do you remember how many muscle layers, generally speaking, are going to be located in the wall of the gastrointestinal tube? How many layers of muscles that you've seen in this general diagram? And I told you this is a very general rule. And we're going to see exceptions for this general rule as we keep studying the different parts of the gastrointestinal tract. How many layers of muscles did we have in the muscularis externa? How many layers of muscle do we have in here? We've got inner circular, outer longitudinal. Inner circular, outer longitudinal. So how many muscle layers do we have in the muscularis externa? We've got inner circular, outer longitudinal. How many muscle layers? two. Got two muscle layers. This is the general rule. This is the general rule. Which one is inside? Which one is outside again? Is the circular muscle layer on the inside or the outside? Can you remind me? See on here, again one more time. Which muscle layer was inside? The circular muscle layer. Which one was outside? Longitudinal muscle layer. Why is it so important to have the circular muscle layer on the inside, the longitudinal muscle layer on the outside? Why is it located like this? Does it make any difference? Circular muscles to be on the inside and longitudinal muscle to be on the outside? Why I don't have longitudinal on the inside and circular muscle layer on the outside? What do you think? Because if you did have the longitudinal muscle layer on the outside, on the inside like this, what's going to happen when you contract those circular muscle, this circular muscle layer? You're going to be blocking the blood supply going to the longitudinal muscle layer. So which one do you have on the inside? General rule. General rule. Again, which one do I have on the inside? It's my circular muscle layer. And which one do I have on the outside? It's my longitudinal muscle layer. This is the general rule. The first exception for this general rule is going to be in the pharynx. The pharynx has an inner longitudinal and an outer constrictor, or in other words, circular. So I have the longitudinal muscle layer on the inside and the circular muscle layer on the outside. So how come I have this arrangement in the pharynx and it will not be disrupted? How come the circular muscle layer on the outside doesn't block the blood supply going to the longitudinal muscle layer? Because one thing that I want to ask you here, for how long do you contract your pharyngeal muscles? So when do I contract my pharyngeal muscles? When I swallow, right? So how long do you swallow per day? For how long do you swallow per day? Minutes, hours? If you calculate all the time that you have been taking to move the food in your pharynx, where you've got the pharyngeal muscle contractions, is it in terms of hours or minutes? What do you think? Does it take you minutes or hours to swallow throughout the day? Yeah, maybe 2 to 5 minutes per day, right? So this is not enough time to disrupt the blood supply going to the circular muscle layer. This is one thing. The other thing, if you insisted on keeping swallowing for longer time, so you can try it now. Keep swallowing as fast as possible. You will find that your pharyngeal muscles got exhausted. Why? Because they are not smooth muscles, they are skeletal muscles. So if you try to swallow as fast as possible and as many times as possible, what you're gonna end up, you will stop at a certain point. You can't keep going, simply because those muscles are skeletal muscles. They are not smooth muscles, so they are more fatigable. So I won't have a problem on here having the circular muscle layer on the outside of the longitudinal muscle layer because it doesn't take me long to contract them. So I won't have any disruption in the action of any. And they are skeletal muscles. So if I even persisted on keeping contracting those muscles, they will be exhausted and they will need to relax. They are, again, skeletal muscles. And this will allow you, having longitudinal muscle layer on the inside will allow you to have a better control on the movement of the foot. Better control than if you've had the longitudinal muscle layer on the outside. All right. So again, what is the general rule? General rule, inside I have circular muscle layer. Outside I have longitudinal muscle layer. First exception for this general rule, it's in my pharynx. I have outer circular, inner longitudinal. Make sense? Make sense? All right. Moving on to another part of the gastrointestinal tract, this is going to be a muscular tube that will be connecting the laryngopharynx to the esophagus. To the stomach. This is going to be the esophagus. And the esophagus is going to be passing from the chest to the abdomen, passing through the diaphragm. So it passes through the diaphragm here, passing through the esophageal hiatus. It joins the stomach at the cardiac orifice. So we see on here, if we're looking at the stomach, the structure of the stomach on here, this region is what we call the cardia of the stomach. All right, so the esophagus is going down like this to join the stomach at the cardiac region, the cardiac sphincter. So what are the different digestive processes that are taking place in the mouth? First, it's ingestion. I'm allowing ingestion to take place. There is no other part of your digestive system that allows ingestion except for the mouth. I'm performing mechanical digestion by mastication, chewing. Mastication is it voluntary or involuntary? What do you think? So when you are chewing, is it voluntary or involuntary? How many are chewing a gum right now? Anybody chewing a gum? So if you're chewing a gum, you initiate by voluntary action. It's voluntary. It's the initiation of the process. But you don't keep thinking, I need to keep chewing, right? So you start as a voluntary process, but it keeps going as a reflex. All right, so the first step is voluntary, and it keeps going as a reflex. Chemical digestion. Chemical digestion, remember, we've got two enzymes released in the saliva. One is going to be breaking down the carbohydrates, and the other one is breaking down the lipids. And the one that breaks down the carbohydrates is what we've called the salivary amylase. And the one that is going to be helping in the breakdown of the fats, it's my lingual lipase. Do you have any propulsion in the oral cavity, in the mouth? Yes, we have the swallowing, we have deglutition. So is the deglutition is a voluntary or involuntary? What do you think? Is it voluntary or involuntary? Voluntary, please write in the chatting box 1. Involuntary, please put 2. If you choose voluntary for swallowing, please write down 1 in the chatting box. If you choose 2, please write down number 2. If you choose involuntary, please write down in the chatting box number 2. So this is voluntary, this is involuntary. 1 and 2, part and part, exactly. So what is the very first thing that you perform? You contract your tongue. You push the food against your palate. This is a voluntary part. This is what we call the buccal phase. I contract the tongue. The tongue squeezes the food against my hard palate, creating a high pressure within my oral cavity. Remember what happens when you reduce volume? What happens to the pressure? Pressure goes up. So here, the food bolus is going to be at a high pressure. So it decides to move to a side with lower pressure. And then the pharyngeal muscle contractions, this is the part which is an involuntary. So we've got 2 phases on here. We've got the buccal phase. This includes the contraction of the tongue, and this is a voluntary part. The pharyngeal esophageal phase, it's the involuntary part, and it's going to be controlled by the medulla oblongata and the pons of the brainstem. Swallowing or deglutition, it's a very complex task. That's why people with muscular problems and neurological problems, they will have disturbance in swallowing. It's going to be more difficult. Why? Because you've got a huge number of muscle groups that will be involved in order to carry on the movement of the food down to your stomach. So for multiple sclerosis, for example, people with multiple sclerosis, they can't send the electrical signals as fast as they used to. So they are not going to be sending those signals to the different groups of muscles in a timely manner for them to coordinate together and allow a normal movement of food. What you're going to see on here, when you allow the food to move down from the oral cavity to the oropharynx, you need at this point to close the upper and lower airways. So what you're going to do, you're going to be moving the larynx up. At the same time, you're going to kink the epiglottis, closing the larynx. So no food is going to be able to move into the larynx. So if you touch your larynx right now and you swallow, what you will notice that the larynx moves up and then goes back down. So the larynx, as it moves up, it's going to be meeting with the epiglottis that kinks down, closing your lower airways. At the same time, the uvula will contract, blocking the nasal cavity, so preventing any food or water from moving up into your nasal cavity. And this explains why you can't breathe when you are swallowing. Can you take a deep breath when you swallow at the same time? Can you do both at the same time? What do you think? You can try it now if you want. Can you breathe in and swallow at the same time? No, you can't. You can't. Why? Because simply when you swallow, you're going to be blocking the upper and lower airways. Uvula contracts to block the nasal cavity, and the larynx moves up and you kink the epiglottis, blocking the lower airways. All right. And this tells you why, if you're laughing, for example, while you're drinking and you started to laugh, what might happen? The water can go up into the nasal cavity and might be coming out of your nose. What what happened in here? You were laughing, so you're trying to breathe. So you're going to be moving the uvula down, and you've got water in your oropharynx. So when the water pressure increases, so rather than moving down towards the esophagus, and you did allow the uvula to relax on here, to move down, so the water instead gonna be moving up into the nasal cavity. Once the food is in here in the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx, you're gonna be relaxing this muscle sphincter, because this is the upper esophageal sphincter. And once the food passes down from the oropharynx and laryngopharynx into the esophagus, you're going to be closing the upper esophageal sphincter. You're going to be constricting the upper esophageal sphincter, preventing the back movement of the food into the pharynx from the esophagus. And this mechanism is going to be taking place again, if you remember, contract behind, relax in front, contract behind, relax in front. This is what we've called the peristalsis. Peristalsis is going to be allowing the food bolus to move down through the length of the esophagus towards the stomach. See on here, the stomach is guarded by a sphincter. We call this is the gastroesophageal sphincter, or the cardiac sphincter. Once the food reaches the stomach, the sphincter relaxes, allowing the food to move down into the stomach. And then when it's down in the stomach, completely in the stomach, it closes again, preventing the back movement or the reflux of the food into the esophagus from the stomach. All right. Questions? For our second in-class activity for today, the second question for the in-class activity for today's session, what do you think is the answer on here? The gastrointestinal tract and digestive organs are positioned in the abdominal cavity by serosa, mucosa, mesenteries, parietal peritoneum. What is holding the abdominal organs to one another? Parietal peritoneum. Any other answer? Mucosa. What do you think? Mucosa is the internal lining of the gastrointestinal tube. I'm not holding anything. This is the internal lining of the gastrointestinal tube. The parietal peritoneum, it's the lining of the cavity. It's not holding the abdominal organs. See on here, the parietal peritoneum is the layer of the peritoneum that is lining the inside of the abdominal cavity. It's not holding the organs together. What do you think is holding the organs together? Back here to the question. So parietal peritoneum, no, it's not holding the organs together. It's not holding the organs together. Mucosa, no. What is holding the organs together? Remember, see on here, as we mentioned, the visceral layer of the peritoneum, see on here, is going to be forming connections between the abdominal organs. And what we called those connections between the abdominal organs that will keep the abdominal organs in their place, those are what we've called the mesenteries. All right, so again, what is holding the abdominal organs in the abdominal cavity? What's holding the abdominal organs in the abdominal cavity? The mesenteries. All right, how about serosa? Serosa, do you remember what is serosa? What is the serosa? It's the outermost layer in the wall of the gastrointestinal tube. So if we're looking at the different layers of the gastrointestinal tube on here, we've got mucosa, submucosa, musculosa or muscularis externa, and the outermost layer of the wall, it's what we call the serosa. This is the serosa, the outermost layer. So it's not holding the abdominal organs to one another in the abdominal cavity. All right. Any questions? Any questions? All right, we can have a break for 10. We come back, discuss more about the digestive system.